They say twins share everything: a face, a bond, a destiny. But Mora Vance didn't want to share the blade meant for her throat. I was born 2 minutes after my sister, and for 20 years, I lived as her shadow, her spare, her safety net. I scrubbed floors while she learned diplomacy. I mended her gowns while she danced with alphas. And when the Northern Legion came to collect their bride as payment for our pax debts, Mora decided I would go in her place. I didn't know I was royalty. I didn't know my blood carried a wolf so rare that kings would wage wars for it. All I knew was the bitter taste of drug tea on my tongue and the feeling of mud seeping through white lace as I collapsed at his boots. But the Lycan King didn't kill me. He looked down at the trembling girl in a soiled wedding dress, and his eyes flared molten gold. One word. That's all it took to change everything: mine. The Vance pack house always smelled of pine smoke and desperation, a crumbling estate clinging to past glory in the shadow of the Blackwood Mountains. It was a cold autumn evening, the kind where frost crept across window panes and the world felt poised on the edge of violence. Elara Vance, 20 years old and slight for a wolf, or what should have been a wolf, knelt in the pantry organizing dried herbs and preserves. Her fingers were stained green from peeling bark for her mother's tinctures, the endless tasks that filled her days. She was the disappointment, the one who hadn't shifted by 16, the runt her father referred to only as the spare, when he bothered to acknowledge her at all. In werewolf hierarchy, a wolf who couldn't shift was worse than Omega. She was nothing. Upstairs in the study, her twin sister Mara paced like a caged animal, her perfect face twisted with terror. Their father slumped in his leather chair, a half-empty whiskey bottle dangling from his hand. The letter on his desk bore the seal of the Northern Legion, a wolf's head crowned in iron. "They're coming tonight," Mara hissed, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "You promised you'd find another way. You promised I wouldn't have to." "The debt is cold," their father slurred. "King Alaric wants his bride. The contract is signed." Mara's hands shook as she gripped the desk. "He's a monster. They say he tears out the throats of prisoners. That his fortress is built on the bones of." "Then you should have thought of that before you gambled away the northern territories." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Mara's eyes slid toward the floor, toward the pantry below, and something cold and calculated settled across her features. "There is another way," she whispered. Elara didn't hear her sister's footsteps. The pantry door creaked open, and Mara appeared with 2 cups of chamomile tea, her smile brittle and too bright. "You've been working so hard," Mara said, pressing a cup into Elara's hands. "I thought you could use a break." Elara blinked. Mara never brought her tea. But there was something frantic in her sister's eyes that made refusal impossible. The tea tasted bitter beneath the honey, but she drank it anyway. "Mara." The world blurred at the edges. "What did you?" "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. "But it should have been you from the beginning. You were always the spare." Darkness swallowed her whole. When consciousness returned, everything was wrong. The rumble of an engine. Wrists bound behind her back. And she was wearing Mara's bridal gown, white silk and seed pearls that had cost a fortune. The dress meant for a queen. Elara forced her eyes open. She was in a transport van, and through the window, the Blackwood Mountains loomed closer. Northern Legion territory. No one came back from the north. The van stopped. Rough hands hauled her out into freezing air. She stumbled, bare feet sinking into half-frozen mud. They'd stopped in a clearing marked by ancient stone pillars, neutral ground between territories. Torches burned in a circle. Her father's men stood hunched on one side. On the other, the Northern Legion waited in dark armor. Someone shoved her forward. Elara fell to her knees, white silk soaking through instantly, ruined in the mud. She looked up through tangled platinum hair, and her breath stopped. King Alaric stood like a monument to violence. Polished steel armor marked with battle scars. A fur mantle across shoulders that seemed carved from stone. Golden hair tied back from a face both beautiful and brutal, bisected by a thick scar. His eyes were pale blue, cold as a frozen lake, and they pinned her in place with the weight of kingdoms burned. He took one step forward, boots splashing through mud. Elara realized she was going to die here. The Lycan King had come to collect his bride, and he'd gotten a fraud instead. The clearing held its breath. Behind Alaric, his army stood in perfect formation, shields locked, spears gleaming in torchlight. Hundreds of them, silent as death, waiting for their king's command. Black banners snapped in the wind, the iron wolf sigil seeming to snarl in the flickering light. Ilara's bound hands trembled behind her back. She couldn't run, couldn't fight, could barely breathe through the terror clawing up her throat. The mud was ice against her knees, seeping through the ruined silk, but she couldn't feel the cold anymore. Only the weight of those pale eyes cutting through her like a blade. Alaric moved closer, each step deliberate, predatory. His hand rested on the pommel of the massive sword at his hip, a weapon that looked like it could cleave her in half. When he stopped in front of her, she had to crane her neck back to see his face. He was enormous, towering, built for war and conquest. One of her father's men spoke up, voice cracking. "The bride, your majesty." "As agreed. The Vance pack honors its." Silence. The word was soft, deadly. The man's mouth snapped shut. Alaric's gaze never left Ilara. He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way a wolf studies prey. Then he did something that made her heart stutter. He leaned down, closing the distance between them until she could see the silver threading through his golden hair, the faint white lines of old scars across his knuckles. He inhaled. It was a deliberate, slow breath, and Ilara watched in frozen horror as his entire body went rigid. His pupils dilated, swallowing the pale blue until his eyes were black and fathomless. A low sound rumbled from his chest, something between a growl and a groan that made every soldier in the clearing shift uneasily. "No," he breathed, the words seeming torn from somewhere deep and primal. "No, this is." He straightened abruptly, turning to his second in command. "Who brought her?" "The Southern Pack, my lord." The Vance girl, as contracted. "She smells wrong." His voice had gone rough, dangerous. "She smells like..." He cut himself off, jaw clenching hard enough that Ilara could see the muscle jump beneath his scarred skin. She should stay silent. Should keep her head down and pray. But something in his reaction, something in the way he'd said wrong, made her speak. "I'm not who you think I am." His eyes snapped back to her, and the intensity nearly knocked her backward. For a long moment, he simply stared, and Ilara saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or realization. Something that looked almost like wonder. Then in one fluid motion, he unclasped the heavy fur mantle from his shoulders. The entire clearing gasped as he draped it over her trembling form, the weight of it settling around her like armor, still warm from his body. It smelled of pine smoke and snow and something wild she couldn't name. He crouched before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, and spoke one word that changed everything. "Mine." The iron keep rose from the mountainside like a shard of black glass, all sharp angles and defensive towers that seemed to pierce the sky. Ilara had expected dungeons, chains and darkness and the smell of death. Instead, she was escorted through torchlit corridors lined with tapestries depicting northern victories, past guards who averted their eyes, and finally into chambers that stole her breath. The king's chambers. Massive windows overlooked the valley below, where pinprick lights marked villages under Alaric's protection. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in. Furs covered a bed that could sleep four. Everything spoke of power, wealth, and a king who commanded absolute loyalty. "His Majesty will join you shortly," the female attendant said, setting down fresh clothes, soft wool and fur-lined leather, finer than anything Ilara had ever touched. "You should clean yourself." Then she was alone. Ilara's mind raced. This made no sense. She was a fake, a substitute, a fraud wearing her sister's dress. Yet Alaric had looked at her like she was something precious, something worth claiming. "Mine," he'd said, as if the word was inevitable. She couldn't stay here. Couldn't play this game she didn't understand. The moment she heard footsteps fade down the corridor, she moved to the door. Unlocked. Heart hammering, she slipped into the hallway, following the path they'd taken, trying to retrace her way to. She turned a corner and collided with a wall of muscle and armor. Alaric caught her wrists before she could fall, steadying her with hands that engulfed hers completely. He'd removed his gauntlets, and his skin was warm, calloused from sword work. He still wore his armor, though he'd shed the outer plating, revealing the leather and chainmail beneath that outlined every powerful line of his body. Running. His voice was low, almost amused, but there was an edge to it that made her pulse spike. I don't belong here. The words tumbled out. You made a mistake. I'm not. I know exactly what you are. He stepped closer, backing her against the stone wall. Not threatening, but inescapable. His eyes searched her face with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in her life. You're not her. Ilara's breath caught. Then why? Why do you smell like fear and wildflowers? He leaned in, and she felt the brush of his breath against her temple as he inhaled again, that same deliberate assessment from the clearing. She wore expensive perfume. Roses and vanilla, cloying and artificial. But you. His voice dropped to something almost reverent. You smell like the mountain meadows after rain. Like something wild that was never meant to be caged. The air between them crackled with something dangerous, something that made Ilara's skin flush hot despite the cold stone at her back. She could see the war in his eyes, control battling against something primal. Who are you really? He demanded, his thumb brushing across her racing pulse. And why did they send you to me wearing her dress? Ilara had no choice but to play the part. If Alaric discovered she was the worthless twin, the one without status or power, he might still send her back. And going back meant facing Mara's wrath, or worse, her father's decision to eliminate the evidence of their deception entirely. So when the dinner bell rang through the Iron Keep, she descended the grand staircase in the fine clothes they'd provided, her platinum hair braided in the northern style, and entered the great hall as if she belonged there. The hall was enormous, filled with Alaric's commanders and their mates, all watching her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Long tables groaned under roasted meats and winter vegetables. At the head table, Alaric sat in his high-backed chair, still in partial armor, looking every inch the warrior king. His eyes tracked her movement across the room like a predator following prey. She took her seat beside him, spine straight, trying to remember everything she'd observed about Mara's posture, her practiced smile. But the moment a young servant girl approached to pour wine, trembling so badly the bottle shook, Ilara's instincts overrode her act. Careful, she said gently, steadying the girl's hand with her own. There's no rush. Take your time. The girl's eyes widened in shock, then gratitude. Around the table, conversations stuttered to a halt. Ilara felt Alaric's gaze boring into her, but she didn't look at him. His second-in-command, a grizzled warrior named Torsten, leaned forward. Tell me, Lady Vance, what do you make of the mountain passes? Your father mentioned you'd studied our territories. It was a test. Ilara knew it. Mara had never studied anything beyond fashion and flirtation. But Ilara had spent years in her father's library, devouring maps and military histories because no one cared what the spare twin read. The Eastern Pass is a trap, she said, surprising herself with her own boldness. Beautiful and wide, yes, but it funnels straight into a valley with no secondary exits. Any commander with sense would fortify the high ridges and rain arrows down on approaching forces. The Western Pass is narrower, more treacherous, but it splits into 3 routes at the summit. Harder to defend, easier to escape. Silence fell across the head table. Torsten's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. Another commander murmured something in the northern dialect that sounded like grudging respect. Alaric set down his knife with deliberate care. And where did you learn such strategy, Lady Vance? I was told you specialized in diplomacy and court matters. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd made a mistake. Revealed too much. I enjoy reading. Reading. His voice was soft, dangerous. He turned to face her fully, and there was something in his expression she couldn't name, not anger but intense focus. The woman I negotiated with couldn't find the Eastern Pass on a map if her life depended on it. She spent our entire meeting discussing trade agreements for luxury goods. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. So tell me again, Wildflower. Who are you? The heat started 3 days later. Ilara woke drenched in sweat despite the mountain cold, her skin hypersensitive to even the silk sheets. Every breath felt thick, charged with something she couldn't name. She'd heard whispers about mate bonds from the other wolves, how they could drive unmated pairs into madness with need, but she'd never experienced anything herself. She was supposed to be human, wolfless. But this burning under her skin felt anything but human. She stumbled from the chambers, desperate for air, for cold, for anything to clear her head. The training grounds were deserted in the pre-dawn darkness, and beyond them, steam rose from the natural hot springs that the northern wolves used for recovery after battle. The contradiction called to her, heat to fight heat perhaps. She made it to the edge of the springs before her knees buckled. The stone was blessedly cool against her palms as she knelt there, trying to breathe through the waves of fever. "You feel it too?" His voice came from behind her, rough as gravel. Ilara's head snapped up. Alaric emerged from the shadows in only leather training pants, his torso bare and gleaming with sweat like he'd been sparring for hours. Scars crossed his chest and abdomen, a map of survival. But it was his eyes that stopped her, blown wide and dark, the same fevered need she felt reflected back at her. "Stay back," she managed, though her body screamed the opposite. He didn't listen. He stalked toward her with predatory grace, and when he reached her, he crowded into her space like he couldn't help himself. "Do you know what this is? What it means?" "I can't," the words tangled in her throat. "I'm not who you think. I'm not her. I'm Ilara. I'm the spare, the broken one, the twin they threw away because I couldn't shift. Mara drugged me and—" His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop her spiral. "Ilara," he repeated, testing her name on his tongue like a revelation. Then his eyes narrowed, focusing on where his fingers wrapped around her arm. He pushed up her sleeve. The bruises bloomed across her pale skin in shades of purple and green. Finger marks from where her father's men had hauled her from the van, older yellow marks from years of being invisible until someone needed to shove her aside. Evidence of a lifetime spent as nothing. The change in Alaric was instantaneous. The fever in his eyes transformed into something colder, more dangerous. His jaw clenched so tight she heard his teeth grind. When he spoke, his voice was barely controlled fury. "Who did this to you? It doesn't matter. Who touched you?" Each word was bitten off precise. His thumb brushed over the bruises with devastating gentleness, the contrast between his rage and his touch making her eyes burn. "My family. My pack. Everyone." The confession broke free. "I was just the spare." His other hand cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. What she saw there wasn't anger at her, but for her. "You were never spare," he growled. "You are mine. And I protect what's mine." The fever didn't break. By midday, Ilara was delirious, her body racked with convulsions that had Alaric bellowing for the pack healer. She barely remembered being carried to the medical wing, barely registered the cool cloths on her forehead or the bitter tea forced between her lips. All she knew was fire, burning through her veins, her bones, trying to break free of her skin. "What's happening to her?" Alaric's voice cut through the haze, sharp with fear she'd never heard from him before. The healer, an ancient woman named Dara with milky eyes and knowing hands, pressed her palms to Ilara's chest and went very still. The silence stretched too long. When Dara finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of terrible discovery. "She's not wolfless, Your Majesty. She's blocked." "Blocked?" Alaric moved closer, his presence the only anchor Ilara had to consciousness. "That's impossible. Bloodline suppression hasn't been practiced in 2 centuries. Yet here it is." Dara's fingers traced patterns over Ilara's sternum, and even through the fever, Ilara felt something responding beneath her skin, pushing against invisible chains. A royal block. The kind used by ambitious parents who had 2 daughters but only wanted one to inherit power. The room tilted. Ilara tried to speak, to deny it, but her voice wouldn't work. Alaric's hand found hers, anchoring her. "What does that mean?" "It means someone performed blood magic on this girl when she was very young, sealing away her wolf to prevent her from shifting. The block is intricate, expensive, and requires a master of the old ways." Dara's fingers moved to Ilara's temples, her wrists, her throat, following lines of invisible binding. "But the mate bond is breaking it. Your connection to her is unraveling years of suppression, and her wolf is clawing its way free. If we don't help it, the block will shatter violently and kill her. Then remove it. Alaric's command was absolute. Now. Your Majesty, you don't understand what she is. Dara turned those milky eyes toward him, and despite her blindness, she saw more than anyone. The signature of this wolf, even bound, it's ancient. Pure. I've only read about this bloodline in legends. She paused, letting the weight of revelation settle. She's a white wolf. The words hung in the air like prophecy. Alaric's hand tightened around Alara's, his voice dropping to something like awe. The royal line. The first wolves. Your mate isn't broken, my king. She's the rarest creature in our world. And her family tried to bury her alive. Dara began gathering herbs and silver instruments, her movements efficient despite the magnitude of what she'd revealed. They gave you a queen, but dressed her as a sacrifice. Fools, the lot of them. Through the fever, Elara felt Alaric lean close, his lips brushing her temple. Hold on, wildflower. Let me see who you really are. The breaking of the block took 3 days. When Elara finally woke, clear-headed and steady, she felt different, lighter, yet more substantial. Something prowled beneath her skin now, patient and powerful, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Alaric barely left her side, and when he looked at her, it was with a reverence that made her chest ache. She was learning what it meant to be valued, to be seen. It was on the morning of the 4th day that the gates of Iron Keep rang with an unwelcome arrival. Elara stood on the battlements beside Alaric, watching 3 horses approach flying the Vance family colors. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead rider's perfect posture, the way she sat her mount like she owned the world. Mara. That's her, Elara said quietly. My sister. Alaric's jaw tightened. His hand moved to rest on the small of her back, possessive and protective. The one who drugged you and sold you in her place. Yes. Elara watched her parents flanking Mara, looking smaller than she remembered. Less powerful. What does she want? I imagine we're about to find out. In the courtyard below, Mara dismounted with theatrical grace, her traveling clothes expensive silk despite the mud-splattered hem. She'd always known how to make an entrance. Their father looked haggard, hungover. Their mother's face was a mask of calculating ambition. Torsten met them at the gate, his hand on his sword hilt. State your business. I am Mara Vance, her sister announced, voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced projection. The true bride promised to King Alaric. I have come to reclaim what was stolen from me. A crowd was gathering now, soldiers, servants, all drawn by the spectacle. Mara played to them like she was born for the stage. My sister, Elara, the wolfless disgrace of our family, drugged me and stole my identity. She kidnapped herself, deceived your king, and has been masquerading as me for weeks. Mara's eyes lifted to the battlements, finding Elara, and the hatred there was pure and undisguised. I demand she be brought before me to answer for her crimes. I demand justice for this treason. Their father stepped forward, swaying slightly. King Alaric was promised the elder Vance daughter. The contract specified me, not the defective spare. This marriage is a fraud. A fraud that has shamed our entire pack, their mother added, her voice dripping false concern. We are here to make this right, Your Majesty. Return the impostor to us for punishment, and my true daughter will fulfill the bargain as intended. Mara smiled then, cold and triumphant. She'd heard the rumors, Elara realized. Heard that the barbarian king was actually wealthy beyond measure, that the Iron Keep was paradise compared to their crumbling packhouse. Heard that Elara was being treated not as a slave, but as a queen. And Mara had come to take it all back. Bring her down, Mara commanded, as if she had any authority here. Let the real bride take her rightful place. Alaric's voice cut through the courtyard like a blade. You will address your king with respect, or you will leave my territory in pieces. But Elara placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. She could feel her wolf now, prowling just beneath her skin, no longer caged but waiting. Patient. Ready. No. Her voice rang clear across the courtyard. Let her speak. She descended the stairs slowly, aware of every eye tracking her movement. The crowd parted as she approached, and she saw the moment Mara truly looked at her, saw the fine northern clothes, the confident posture, the way Alaric's entire army shifted to guard her back. Saw that Alara was no longer the cowering spare who scrubbed floors and swallowed insults. You want justice? Alara stopped at the edge of the challenge circle, the ancient stone ring where northern wolves settled disputes through combat. Then meet me here. Prove your claim. Mara's eyes widened, then narrowed with cruel delight. You can't even shift, you pathetic. I challenge you. The words came out steady, final. Trial by combat. The old way. The courtyard erupted in murmurs. Alaric moved to her side, his voice low and urgent. Alara, you don't have to do this. I can banish them. I can. I am done hiding. She met his gaze, and something passed between them, understanding, trust, the certainty of the bond. I am done being the shadow. Let me show them who I really am. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. Then he stepped back, giving her the space to fight her own battle. Mara was already stripping off her traveling cloak, confident and vicious. This will be quick. You always were weak. She shifted mid-sentence, bones cracking and reforming, until a brown wolf stood in her place. Average size, common bloodline, nothing remarkable except its bared fangs. The wolf lunged. Alara didn't move. She closed her eyes and reached for the presence that had been stirring inside her since the block broke. She felt no pain, no resistance, only relief, like a held breath finally released. The shift took her like a wave. Power exploded through her body, reshaping, expanding, until she stood on 4 legs that trembled with new strength. But it was the gasps from the crowd that made her open her eyes. The world looked different from this height. Sharper. Clearer. She looked down at her paws. Massive, white as fresh snow, gleaming like starlight made solid. Her fur rippled with an otherworldly glow that cast pale light across the suddenly silent courtyard. Mara's wolf had frozen mid-attack, now cowering backward. Alara took 1 step forward, and her sister's wolf collapsed into a submissive crouch, whimpering. Around the circle, wolves began dropping to their knees. Soldiers, servants, commanders. Even Torsten bowed his head in reverence. Then Alaric, the Lycan King who bowed to no one, knelt in the mud before her. The white wolf, someone whispered, and the words spread like wildfire. The queen has come. Alara looked at Mara's trembling form and felt no anger, only pity. Her sister had traded away a legend for a used SUV and hadn't even known it. Leave, Alara said, her voice resonating with power even in wolf form. And never return. The throne room of Iron Keep had witnessed countless coronations, but none like this. Alara stood before the assembled court in ceremonial white leather and silver armor, her platinum hair unbound and cascading down her back like moonlight. The bruises were gone. The fear was gone. In their place stood a queen who had clawed her way from shadow into legend. Mara knelt in chains before the throne, stripped of finery, her parents flanking her in similar bonds. They looked smaller now, pathetic. The mighty Vance family reduced to what they truly were, desperate gamblers who'd bet on the wrong daughter. Alaric stood beside his throne, not sitting, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Mara Vance, you are guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder of your blood. Your parents are complicit in these crimes. Their mother tried to speak, but Torsten's hand on her shoulder silenced her. By rights, I could execute you. Alaric let the words hang. But my mate has shown more mercy than you deserve. Alara stepped forward, and even chained, Mara flinched. You will be escorted to the border and banished to the wastelands. You will take nothing but the clothes on your back. If you ever set foot in the northern or southern territories again, the sentence is death. She paused, letting Mara meet her eyes one final time. You traded away a sister for a life of comfort. Now you have neither. The guards dragged them away, Mara's protests echoing through the hall until the heavy doors closed, cutting off the sound. Then there was only silence, and the weight of what came next. The mating ceremony was ancient, binding, witnessed by both their packs united in the hall. When Alaric placed the crown on her head, white gold and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars, Elara felt the final piece of herself click into place. This was who she was always meant to be. "My queen," he murmured, and kissed her before all their people. Later, as the celebrations raged below, they stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. New banners flew from every tower. White wolves on black fields, the symbol of the new era. The wind carried the sound of music and laughter, two packs no longer divided but united under the rarest of queens. Alaric wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "No regrets, wildflower?" Elara leaned into him, watching their kingdom spread out beneath the stars. She thought of the girl who'd scrubbed floors and believed she was nothing. That girl was gone, transformed into something her family had tried so desperately to bury. "Not a single one," she whispered. "I was never the spare. I was always the queen. It just took a king to see it." His arms tightened around her, and in the distance a wolf howled, white and pure and free at last. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel for more werewolf romance tales, alpha kings, rejected mates, and powerful omega stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me create more content like this. Thank you for reading, and I'll see you in the next.